Welcome to iTTV for Form 4 Science. The title of this lesson, Nervous Coordination. Now, so far through this chapter, we've had a look at two main things. Firstly was body coordination, which is how different parts of our body work together harmoniously so that we can effect a response. Then we looked at the nervous system, which consisted of two main parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. We've also looked at the neuron, the three types of neurons that we have: the sensory neuron that sends impulses from the receptor to the CNS, the motor neuron that sends impulses from the CNS to the effector, and the relay neuron which connects a CNS, a sensory neuron, with a motor neuron. In this lesson, we want to have a look at some other things that are part of the nervous system. The receptor, the effector, and we want to have a look at a particular type of response called a reflex action. What are receptors? Cells, group of cells, specialized in detecting a stimulus and transmit nerve impulses through the sensory organ. So a receptor is a special cell. This cell, when it receives a stimulus, will send out a nerve impulse. The stronger the stimulus, the more powerful the nerve impulse will be. We have many types of receptors. An example is on your hand, in your skin alone, we have a receptor for pain, we have a receptor for hot, we have a receptor for cold, we have a receptor for pressure. Our eyes have receptors for light. Our ears have receptors for sound vibrations. Our nose and tongue have receptors for chemicals. We've also got receptors inside our body to have a look at temperature, acidity, or pH. We also have receptors to have a look at the amount of water in our body. All of these receptors basically detect a stimulus and send an impulse to the central nervous system. Define effectors. Cells or organs that produce a response. Now, mainly in our body, our effectors are muscles or glands. These are the two main effectors that we have. And they will do something that will evoke a response. The muscle will contract, so our hand will pull up. The gland will release a chemical into the body like a hormone. So remember your effectors, mainly muscles and glands. Their function to produce a response. The relationship between various stimuli, sensory organs, and their responses. Stimuli, light from object. Sensory organ or receptor, photoreceptors in the retina of the eye. Response, see the object. Stimuli, chemical substance. Sensory organ and receptor, chemoreceptors in the taste bud. Response, taste the substance. Stimuli, sound. Sensory organ, receptors. Receptors in the ear. Response, hear the sound. Stimuli, pricking. Sensory organ or receptor, pain receptors in the skin. Response, feel pain. So this is how our stimulus, receptor, and response are all interconnected. I think the easiest of them to understand is the pricking. When someone pricks you, the receptor here, the pain receptor, sends a muscle. Your response, you feel pain. Maybe you pull your hand away or something like that, or shout, ouch. So remember, stimulus, receptor, effector. Now, how are they connected to each other? They're connected to each other through a simple pathway. Let's go up to the board and draw the typical pathway that connects the stimulus receptor, and effector. So what we are looking at is a nervous pathway. So this is a nervous pathway. Now, as we said, we always start with a stimulus. The stimulus will be picked up by the receptor. Now, the receptor has to send the message to the central nervous system. To do this, we use sensory neurons. So this message will go to the C and S, and it'll be carried by the sensory neuron. Now, in the CNS, we'll do our analysis, we'll do our interpretation, and then we send the message back to the effector, which I said was either going to be a muscle or a gland. But how do we send the message from the CNS to the effector? This is where the motor neuron comes in. So we send it from CNS to effector through a motor neuron. So this is a typical pathway that we have. Stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron to CNS. CNS does the analysis. We send it back through a motor neuron to the effector, and what we get finally here is a response. So from stimulus to response. We get a stimulus, we have a response. Light, see. Chemical, taste. Pricking, pain. All of these basically work through this typical pathway. Now, where's the relay neuron? The relay neuron will be found in the CNS, either in the brain or in the spinal cord. So inside here, this is where we find the relay neuron in the CNS, which is typically our brain, like I said, or our spinal cord. How the nervous system works. Stimuli detected by receptor inside sensory organ. Information, electrical impulse sent out along sensory neuron to central nervous system. The brain interprets impulses and send out impulses along motor neuron to effectors, bring about a response. So exactly what we said. Stimulus, receptor. Receptor, sensory neuron. Sensory neuron, CNS. CNS, motor neuron. Motor neuron, effector. Effector, response. We flow through the whole nervous system, making sure that the stimulus has the right and appropriate response. What is reflex action? Automatic fast response to a stimulus. Why is reflex action important? For survival and protection from harm. Examples: knee-jerk action, pull hand from hot object, sneeze, blink when object close to eyes, make iris small in bright light. So what is the function of a reflex action? Well, a reflex action is a very fast and automatic response. Firstly, it's automatic. We don't know it's going to happen, it just occurs. Why is it automatic? Well, because when survival and protection come into it, we don't have time to think and interpret. It just takes over and does something. Examples are the knee jerk, where you are hit just below your knee and your leg shoots up. But more importantly are other things, such as if you touch a hot object and you pull your hand away. If dust comes towards your eyes, you start blinking. When you walk into a bright room, your iris becomes small to protect your eyes. You sneeze when dust enters into your nose. All of these are reflex actions that basically help to try and protect and keep us out of harm's way. What is reflex arc? The pathway along which an impulse travels from the receptor to the effector in a reflex action consists of receptor, sensory organ, sensory neuron, relay neuron in the central nervous system, motor neuron, and the effector, muscles, glands, controlled by spinal cord. So this is called a reflex arc. And I'm very sorry to say this to you, but you must be able to draw a reflex arc and label a reflex arc as part of your examination requirements. So let's draw a typical reflex arc. Now, when we draw a reflex arc, there are many components to it. So what we're going to try and do is keep it simple. Look, this is science, it's not art. So what we need are just the basic things. What we're going to draw is pulling your hand away from a hot object. So this is the pull hand hot object arc. So let's start first with the hot object. Let's say here we have a candle with a flame. Above the candle with the flame is going to be your finger, like so. Now let's go through this slowly. This is your stimulus. In this case, heat. Inside your hand, you have to have the receptors. So these are your receptors. So let's fill this in as we go along. We get a stimulus that is detected by a receptor. These receptors will send an impulse along the sensory neuron. So we're flying along in the sensory neuron. Remember, the sensory neuron, the cell body is outside, like so. Then this will enter into the spinal cord. Let's draw the spinal cord in over here. Now, as we enter into the spinal cord here, we connect to a relay neuron. This is our relay. The relay neuron will connect onto the final part, which will be our motor neuron. The motor neuron will come out. So this is our motor neuron. So let's fill in this. We've got the stimulus detected by a receptor. Receptor sends the impulse along a sensory neuron. Sensory neuron goes to relay neuron. Relay neuron sends the message out through a motor neuron. So here we have motor neuron. Now the motor neuron will carry the information until it reaches our effector. We said that the effector is either a muscle or a gland we'll use a muscle this time. So over here we have a muscle. I'll draw in a muscle. So as we reach here, we break out into the dendrites like this. Here, this is our effector, in this case, a muscle. So where we're going, motor neuron to effector muscle. And what does the muscle do? Well, what are you going to do? If you put your finger on top of a hot thing like this, are you going to pull your hand away or leave it there? Well, you're going to pull your hand away. To pull your hand away, the muscle must contract. So what happens here is your muscle contracts and you pull your hand away. This is what we call a reflex arc. And you need to be able to draw this and look at how simple it is. Keep it to the basic things, the most important things. Draw your stimulus in, draw the receptor. Then sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, always, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the effector muscle, and then that's it. In terms of the diagram, that's it. The pathway, you got to have it a bit more detailed. Stimulus, receptor, sensory, relay, motor, effector muscle, response, which is the muscle contracts. So this is what we call a reflex arc. Now, the only trick to the reflex arc is the knee jerk. You're going to find that with the knee jerk, we have no relay neuron. So with the knee jerk, it goes straight from sensory to motor. So there are only 2 neurons involved in a knee jerk. But in most other reflexes, there are 3 neurons involved: the sensory, the relay, and the motor neuron. Try to remember this. It's quite important. The knee jerk, only 2 neurons. Other reflexes, 3 neurons. Explain the knee jerk reflex. The part below the kneecap is struck by a reflex hammer. The sensory receptor in the muscle is stretched. So this is your knee jerk. Now let's go up to the board and step through this so that we understand all the things that are occurring. Okay? So let's begin. I'll just draw a line here. So first, this is your knee here, and we hit it with the hammer. So this is your stimulus. And inside here, these are the receptor. So you hit with a reflex hammer, the receptor detects the knock or the pressure. Let's go back to the slide. Sensory neuron is stimulated to send a nerve impulse which travels to the spinal cord. So the receptor now sends a message through a sensory neuron, remember, cell body outside, and it goes to our spinal cord. Let's draw in a nice spinal cord over here. And the sensory neuron arrives here. So we've sent the message through the sensory neuron. Let's just label this SN so we know that that's our sensory neuron. Stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, and we're moving into the spinal cord. Okay, let's move on and see what happens next. Let's go back to that slide. Motor neurons send out a new nerve impulse to the effector. The muscle cell is stimulated to contract, which causes the leg to swing forward. So let's have a look at this final part here. Here, instead of a relay, there's no relay. It goes straight to the motor. So this is our motor neuron coming out. This is our muscle here. Goes here. like so. This is our motor neuron, and then the muscle will contract and your leg will kick up, like so. So let's have a look at this arc. Stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, motor neuron, muscle. So notice there are only two neurons, the sensory neuron and motor neuron. Over here, when we did the pull hand away from a hot object, we had the sensory neuron. Here we had the relay neuron over here, and we had the motor neuron over here. 3 neurons, totally different. This one is slightly slower, not much slower, very slightly, but slightly slower. This one a bit faster because only 2 neurons involved. Okay? What is proprioceptors? Receptors connected to sensory neurons receive and respond to internal stimuli known as stretch receptors. Now, proprioceptors are special receptors that we have inside a muscle. Let me go up to the board here and sketch this for you. Let's make a little compartment here. Now, if you have a muscle, and we tend to draw muscles with the lines going across them, inside your muscles we have special receptors. These receptors are known as proprioceptors. These are known as proprioceptors. They send information to the brain about the muscle. Now, why do we need to do this? Look, our muscles allow us to move. All our movement is muscular. If our muscles are damaged and we can't move, it will severely affect us. We may not be able to go and work. We may not be able to go and get food. We may not be able to run away from danger. All of these things affect our survival. So it's very important that our muscles are always kept in good condition. So we have proprioceptors, also known as stretch receptors, that tell the brain what the muscle is doing. Where are proprioceptors found? Found in muscles, tendons, ligaments, and joints. So they're found in all the key areas that are involved in movement. Your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, and your joints. What is the function of proprioceptors? Initiate and send impulses to the central nervous system. We've talked about that here. Proprioceptors send messages to the brain. Let's go back to the slide. Inform us about orientation and movement of body parts. Example, if I stand like this, my proprioceptors are sending a message to my brain saying, I'm standing in a silly position. So my brain knows what I'm doing. Let's go back to the slide. To maintain balance and posture. When I'm standing here and I'm moving around, my body needs to make sure that I'm in complete balance so that I don't fall over and look silly. Proprioceptors. Work closely with receptors in the inner ear to maintain body balance and coordination. Now, in our inner ear, we have these semicircular canals. They are there to help us maintain balance. So the proprioceptors talk to the semicircular canals to help me maintain my balance. What is kinesthesis? The awareness of position and movement of the body. Now, kinesthesis is this awareness of the body and movement. It is also training of muscles because we can do things sometimes without looking. Example, and I'm not going to open all my buttons, but without looking, I can actually unbutton my shirt. Now, in order for me to do something like unbutton my shirt or tie my shoelace without looking, means that my muscles have become so trained, the proprioceptors themselves can do something without my having to look. That is called kinesthesis, the ability to do things because we are aware from previous experience. How is the proprioceptors related to numb feeling? The numb feeling in legs or hands results from lack of proprioceptive impulses. Sometimes your hand feels a bit numb. This means the proprioceptors have been working too much that they can't send an impulse anymore. So your hand suddenly feels numb because there's no information coming to the brain about the muscles. Let's do a few questions. Mitran moved his hand immediately when he accidentally touched a boiling kettle. What type of action is this? So when you pull your hand away from a hot object, what action is that? That's called let's have a look at the answer, a reflex action. Question 2. P, sensory neuron, Q, relay neuron, R, motor neuron, S, receptor, T, effector. Which of the following shows the correct order for a normal nervous impulse passing through parts named above? Now, remember, this is the key over here. Stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, effector. That's what we're looking at. Try to put them into the right order. Have you done it? Let's check the answer. Answer C. S, P, Q, R, T. S, receptor. P, sensory neuron. Q, relay neuron. R, motor neuron. T, effector. Question. Which of the following best describes proprioceptors? Stretch receptor, sensory organ, tendons, ligaments. So remember our proprioceptors earlier? They also were called another type of receptor. Chosen your answer? Let's have a look. A. Stretch receptors. Proprioceptors are present in all the following except muscles, tendons, ligaments, blood vessels. In which one won't we find proprioceptors? Basically, which one is not a muscle or not involved in movement? Chosen your answer? D. Blood vessels. A group of students want to investigate a knee-jerk reflex action. Draw and label the diagram. Include spinal cord, sensory neuron and motor neuron. 3 marks. That's a lot of marks. So you need to be able to draw it. Now, the example is what we did up here. Keep it simple, students. Just draw a simple knee, stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron going to the spinal cord, motor neuron coming out, muscle. That's all you need to draw for your reflex action. If you want to be a bit neater and tidier, draw a large thigh muscle. Draw a big leg, and in the leg, keep everything inside there. But it still has to go to the spinal cord and come back. Summary. Remember the key things. Receptors, cells that detect stimulus. Initiates transmission of nerve impulses through sensory organs. Remember effectors, cells that produce response when stimulated. Know your relationship between stimulus, sensory organ and their responses. Example, light photoreceptor can see. Remember how the nervous system works. Stimulus, receptor, sensory, relay, motor, effector. Remember your knee jerk, your reflex actions and its importance. Remember the knee jerk reflex. Also the pulling hand away from the hot object. Remember what proprioceptors are and their functions. Remember kinesthesis, awareness of position, movement, how you can do things without looking. Print this slide out. Remember, the idea is you should be able to talk about all these key things just like I am. Practice it, okay? Nervous response, you should be able to go stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, effector, muscle contracts. Those are the kind of things you need to be able to do. Practice them with your friends. Make sure you can verbalize this whole subtopic. That's all the time we have for this lesson. Thank you for watching ITTV.